and thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Michael Clark. I'm a past president of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, and I've got as my guest today another past president of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, Tom Terry. Tom, thanks for joining me.
You bet. Glad to be here.
So for those of you that don't know, let me give you a little bit of background on Tom. Tom is the CEO of the Terry Group, which is a firm he founded back in 2010. Prior to the Terry Group, he was CEO of JP Morgan Compensation and Benefits Strategies. And prior to that, president of CCA Strategies, which was formerly Chicago Consulting Actuaries. Some people might know it by that name. That's also a firm that Tom founded. We'll talk a little bit about those firms that Tom has founded in today's interview. Tom, as I mentioned, is a past president of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. He's also a past president of the American Academy of Actuaries and the International Actuarial Association. So I'm happy to have you here, Tom. You're someone that I've respected for a long time. I've had the opportunity to talk to Tom at numerous meetings and knew that he would provide a lot of good and interesting insight for those that view both this event live and the ones that we have recorded. And as a reminder for everyone, if you've got questions that you want Tom to address, feel free to drop those in the Q&A panel for those of you that are listening live, and we'll get to those as we go throughout today's interview. So, Tom, I do want to start with just the evolution of your career. You founded two companies. You've worked for two large companies. I mentioned one of them. What led you to create your own companies?
Well, revisionist history is always good, and I've had that question asked of me, Mike, so many times over the years, and I probably have given, dozens of different answers, and so I'll try to be as honest as I can be in that. The firm Chicago Consulting Actuaries that I founded in 1991. This is on the heels of a 16-year launch of my career at one of the major HR benefits consulting firms. And I'll tell you, I thought I was going to be a lifer at that firm. And so it wasn't as if somehow I was escaping something that wasn't working for me, because I loved the firm and I still have a huge affection for them today. So there's the departure, and then there's starting something new, because I might have departed to go someplace else, but I didn't do that. I departed to start something new. So let me talk about the departure. This is sort of a little bit of an insight into my growth and development as a professional. I thought of myself as a client person, and I dug in. I got my hands dirty. I led teams. Won new business with some wonderful accounts, and had a terrific career going. And it was clear to me as I looked upstream, if you will, at the people sort of more senior to me, that my future was going to be in sort of management and leadership. And I thought, well, I'm not cut out for that kind of thing. I really am a client guy, and I don't want any of this leadership stuff. I hate managing things, but I love doing client work. So that was a first sign that somehow or another I just wanted to sort of bolt from what I thought was like a career that would crash and burn, because I wasn't cut out to be a manager or a leader. I had no training in it and didn't know what that was like. That was the departure. By the way, that's all false thinking. That's all stuff that was in my head that was all false.
All self-narrative there.
Yeah, which was really a false narrative. What I failed to understand, that I was still a developing human being and a developing professional. And yes, I was in my mid to late 30s, but I was still, developing as a professional. But let me flip to the other side of that, though, Mike, which is what made me start a firm. Because as I said, I might have just flipped to another firm, but I guess I started a firm because I could. I just can't think of another reason. It's because I could. And I didn't do it alone. I did it in partnership with a couple of other folks. And so just the opportunity to do so seemed interesting and attractive. I happened to notice that in our consulting profession, there were names like Wyatt. There were names like Towers, Perrin, Forster, and Crosby, and somebody named Mercer. All these firms that are sort of big name firms, they were all started by somebody. And it was intriguing to me that they all started somewhere. And it dawned on me, well, wait a minute, maybe this is possible to do again. One thing I was pretty certain of, Mike, was that I didn't want to go and just be a lone practitioner or be a small practitioner. We did we did very much intend to launch something and grow it. And so we did. I'll tell you a couple of other things that were happening at the time. I hate to belabor the answer to your question, but there was a pivot with respect to technology at the time. There was the beginning of a movement of work from mainframes to personal computers, which seemed to open up some doorways, which we very much took advantage of. And I think also there was a business downturn at the time we started, which seems counterintuitive, but actually it was opportunistic because there was disruption in the marketplace, dislocation in the marketplace. And anytime there's disruption or dislocation, I think that smells of opportunity.
No, I love that, especially thinking about those 2 points you mentioned, the business disruption and then the technological advances that made other things possible that maybe hadn't been accessible prior to that. So I love that. Okay, so I want you to think back. If you had to give your younger self some advice today, knowing what you know now about starting your own firm, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I might have said, hold on. I'm glad I didn't listen to that voice, but I might have said, hold on, give this a chance, give yourself a chance, recognize that you're a growing and developing professional, and those roles that you say or that you see are crash and burn failure roles may well turn out to be something else other than that. In other words, you're still a developing professional. The crazy thing, Mike, is that once we started to grow, I found myself back in the same situation. Wait a minute, I'm now having to manage, and that's exactly what I said I didn't want to do. So I discovered that was something that I could learn and grow into. So I think one piece of advice I would have given myself was, hey, slow down and just be sure of your reasons. I don't have any regrets at all, but that it is kind of funny that I look back and I see with irony that one of the reasons that I left was something that I jumped right straight into again. So I didn't really escape what I thought I was escaping. You know, there's another thing. There's one more thing too I want to say about that too, because in our business, in our consulting profession, you know, we're a relatively small profession and we see each other. We know who else is out there, and there are definitions of success. And I think one thing that I was real conscious of early on was, how are we doing relative to others? And I think I would have, you know, I used to sort of overly concern myself with others as a measuring stick, competitors as a measuring stick. Are we doing as well as they're doing, whatever that measure might be? And I think I came to learn, but it took me a while to learn that no, what I want to draw from competitors is not a metric or a yardstick with which to beat myself up, but rather inspiration. I can be inspired by competition. I can be motivated by competition. So it's how I look at how we sit and where we sit in the worlds in which we play that I think is something that I would like to have known more about back then.
I want to go back to something you said, and I want to see if I'm characterizing this right. Would you say that thinking back to the advice you'd give to your younger self, is it fair to say that you tell yourself, hey, sit with that discomfort for a little bit, learn what you can out of that discomfort, and it'll give you even a better springboard off of to which you might go, and you might end up doing something different, but sit in that discomfort. Don't just run away from it.
Absolutely. And let me add to that. I'm really glad you said that, Mike. That prompts me a little bit more too, because I would never advise anybody to jump ship and start something to it because you're escaping. I'd rather see somebody commit themselves fully to their successes at where they're at, fully. And it's not a startup firm is not a savior situation. You know, my strong advice would be commit yourself fully to your success. And that's where that voice would come back to me and say, hey, Tom, are you certain that you've given it a chance? Are you certain that management and leadership is not for you? Because And I probably didn't give it the chance that I could have or should have given it. I have no regrets, but that's a piece of wisdom that I think I have after the fact that I would pass along to anybody else considering starting up an organization.
No, I really like that. I think that's really important for all of us to take into consideration, right? Because we do run across those hard times in our career that make us question, hey, are we really doing the right thing? Are we in the right place? Are we taking on the right roles? And sometimes it is a matter of just saying, let me stick this out. I've always had a rule for myself that I have to give something 1 to 2 years before I decide one way or another, is this for me, is this not for me, right?
Yeah.
Because you just never know how things are going to progress, and let alone the skills that you're going to learn from being in new or uncomfortable situations.
Well, just to add to that, Mike, I think as well, to the extent that something is standing in my way of my success at firm A, if I think I'm going to not recreate that same problem or that same barrier in firm B, it's a mistake. I've always been skeptical of, I've interviewed an awful lot of actuaries in my career, and I'm always skeptical of someone who comes from a firm and says, well, I'm really unhappy with firm X because of X, Y, Z. I'm very skeptical because I know that person is going to come and recreate that same situation for him or herself with our organization. And so it's very telling. We tend to make the same, we tend to repeat ourselves unless we're very consciously going at it and intending not to.
I think that's a really interesting insight. And now that you say that, I've seen that play out with people as well. And I think you're spot on. So thinking about the path that you were on, the firms that you started, what were your greatest challenges? And then on the flip side, what have been the greatest rewards from the career path that you've taken?
Well, first of all, moving from a larger organization to starting up an organization, it's not that I and my couple of colleagues went into it blind, but the professional sales was probably the biggest difference. I became interested in sales at the large firm, the firm from which I emerged, but it was never a 24/7 thing, which it was. I mean, I can remember we moved into some temporary space and we were sitting around. We had some phones in front of us at a blank table with no paper, no nothing, and it was dial for dollars. I don't want to be trite about it, but I mean, literally, it was our lifeline was the telephones and the meetings, and learning how to sell was a terrific experience, and learning how to accept losing was a big deal as well. We listened to these sales training tapes. We'd huddle in the 7 o'clock in the morning. We'd huddle together. We'd put these tapes into the machine. We'd listen to these sales training tapes, and these sales training tapes were outstanding because they prepared me for defeat or for losing. And I'll never forget the mantra of it takes 7 touch points before you close a sale on average. This is Brian Tracy, who's a famous sales training guy. And we always joked about that we come back from a new business meeting with empty hand and we go, well, 1 down, 6 to go. And it was that attitude of learning from losing that I think was really, really, we had to learn how to accept losing as a growth opportunity and not an indictment.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, really good insight. Last question in this subject, and then I do want to move on to some other areas here, but what advice would you have for somebody today that might be thinking about starting their own firm? I think you've given a lot of good reasons as to why you did what you did. And I really appreciate the insights, especially thinking back to your younger self and what advice you'd give. But somebody comes to you today and says, Tom, I'm thinking of starting my own firm. What would you tell them?
Well, I'll try to plow some new territory in addition to that, which we've already talked about. Something that pops into my mind is that, and I was very fortunate back at the big firm to learn how to partner with other organizations and not think that somehow I or we have to do it all. And becoming a good partner to other organizations became and continues to be a really valued skill set. What I learned in the big firm was what was then called and is continued to be called cross-selling, which was to essentially partner with other practices. I learned that early on, and I tell you, those skill sets were super valuable and I think translatable into starting an organization and starting a business, because you just can't do it alone. I absolutely found out that we couldn't do it alone. Our capacity to reach out and partner with other organizations started and grew, and we always nurtured that capacity. So I think that's one huge thing that I would suggest to folks.
No, that's excellent. I appreciate those insights.